Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the ThePCelitist. My name is Woodsie.
My name is Shepherd.
And you're joining us for our Friday discussion on our new day with our new schedule. The angels are singing. Right?
Sure.
You have to be more enthusiastic. That was as enthusiastic as I get about this stuff. So I need you to be here with me.
Okay.
Okay, whatever. Anyway, we are talking about something I've been looking forward to talking about for a while. This has been going through the internets.
All the interwebs
For a while. And we haven't touched on it just because we've had other things on the docket that were first. But now I want to get into this video series written by and produced by Anita Sarkeesian. Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Okay. And specifically this video, the Miss Male Character Tropes versus Women in Video Games. Now, there's been quite a few rebuttal videos because there is no comments. They're disabled on her YouTube channel, which we will get to momentarily. But Shepherd, why don't you go ahead and just summarize her video for us?
Yes, the video, the one in particular we're talking about, the Ms. Female Character, is about 25 minutes long. And if you have seen it already, then you'll be able to know a lot of what we're talking about. If you have not seen it, I would encourage you to at least watch a few minutes of it to get a gist. But just for the sake of this discussion, I'll briefly summarize. And, again, for the sake of this discussion, I won't cover every single thing she goes over. But a large point that she makes revolve around the manner in which female characters have been portrayed, largely in older games, using very simple visual markers, such as creating an exact clone of, for example, Pac-Man and putting a bow and lipstick and eyelashes on her, and those are the things that distinctly set her apart as a female. And she runs through a lot of examples where this kind of thing is manifested, and and I was surprised to see there were this many bows in video games, because she showed like a dozen or more examples of female characters having a bow on, where that's the only significant differentiator between the female and male characters. So she talks a lot about the very simplistic way in which female characters have been portrayed in such a way as to kind of say, if by default, if you don't see any distinguishing gender characteristics on a character, it's a male. And we will very explicitly tell you when a character's female. And that's done in ways that, according to Anita, are very kind of stereotypical girlish ways, be it high heels or the color pink is another big one. So she goes into a lot of examples of this type of thing. And so I said it's about 25 minutes. You don't need to watch the whole thing to really get the gist of it. But that's largely the point she's trying to make. And her kind of final summation is that those kind of things aren't necessary. That why is it necessary to give this character a bow? Or why is it necessary to explicitly say this character is female, and then go no further than that, leave her with no other, character development, really contribution to the narrative, things like that. So the gist of her video are those pieces there.
Right. So this is our discussion begins somewhere around in my opinion, the reaction of the gaming community to her video instead of her video directly. I think there's some things to say about her video directly. There's some parts that I sympathize with her video. There's some parts I disagree with her video. But
What are the big takeaways that you got from the video? Just because I have just a few thoughts, and we don't want to spend the whole time on her video. I know you want to talk about the reaction to it, but what are the key takeaways that you have? Just quick hits.
The key takeaways are, it's interesting to see everything she points out in something of a montage where, here are all the bows in games all across the land. I think there's a lot of good reason in just culturally why that is. I don't see it as something vindictive or malicious. I just think you have, like Mario, you take that character, for instance. Mario is culturally a boy's name. It's a male-looking character. And you're going to give Mario purpose, so you create a girlfriend in pink, and it just, long hair and pink, and maybe a bow. I don't know if Peach has a bow in the original Donkey Kong game. It quickly gives the character purpose, and mostly boys are the one who play this game, and that's just an easy, literary device. Girl, boy, boy get to girl, you know what I mean? So
I thought you were going to say we should do a video about how Mario stereotypes Italians.
you could. You
Yeah.
could. I mean, there are tons of tropes you could come up with that are always stereotyped. Like, I could create a video series of tropes of jocks in high school and how they're not treated fairly. You
Yeah,
know,
I was a jock in high school.
yeah, and if you were being portrayed in a movie, you would be a big, dumb, bubbling idiot jerk off, right? I mean,
Yes.
basically, and you harass the nerds. That's what you would
Right.
do. But you are a nerd.
Little did they know I was one of the biggest nerds.
So, I mean, anyway, I think they were functional for the time. You know, how do you make this thing the girlfriend of this thing within 8 pixels? You put a bow on it. Now that we have progressed further, we don't need such simplistic, visual aids anymore. You could do something more complex. And I think that's where we really get into the issue. And I sympathize with her most when she talks about, like, she mentioned the King Koopa's kids, and there's like 30 of them, and all of them are boys, except for one. And they all have some sort of profession. One is a scientist, one is a, I don't know, samurai. I don't know what they were. They're all sorts of things. And then there's the girl.
And she doesn't bring up the fact that the Koopas just need to learn to use birth control. It's possible they're Catholic, and if that's the case, then we have to respect. But yeah, so I mean, my just quick take. I don't, again, we don't want to kind of point by point pick at a lot of things she was talking about, but just some things I think need to be said. I actually thought it was a pretty decent presentation of I think the number of examples she gave just reinforced, like you said, they're just the sheer number of bows in video games. I had no idea that this device was used so commonly.
Not bow and arrows.
Yes.
There's a lot of those.
Nice pink bows. So I think it was interesting. I was actually, kind of surprised to see, and it's not like I was surprised to see that women had been portrayed this way in video games, but I thought it was interesting that she did point out just all the specific ways in which they were. One thing that stuck out to me is a lot of the games she showed were either very old, very indie, and or very small budget.
Right.
Which means there's games that are limited by visuals or design or talent of the people working on them. And this is not to excuse any of the things that were done. I'm not condemning them as horrific, but I just think that you have to consider the context in which they were created. I think it's safe to say that in the early days of gaming, it was almost entirely men making games for almost entirely boys and men.
Right.
And again, I'm not saying therefore it's justified. I'm just saying it makes a little more sense when you consider that context. And using hindsight doesn't necessarily give you the ultimate moral authority, but it is always easy to take a more, and this is not to say that feminists have never made complaints about the way women are portrayed in media, but it is easy to use a modern, more progressive perspective to look back and judge decisions that were made in the 80s and 90s. So right. It's a little more convenient to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And just one final point I want to make on this before moving on is that one of the things she talks about is one of the easiest ways to make a character female is just color it pink. I am a diehard Packers fan, and I have a bunch of Packers jerseys, and my wife, by association, is also now a Packers fan. I told her that I wanted to get her a Packers jersey, and I showed her the samples on NFLshop.com. Every single one of them was pink. Packers are forest green and sunshine yellow. And I just think it's remarkable that the NFL says to women, not just the NFL, but like pro sports, oh, you want to be a sports fan too? Here's a pink jersey. Right. Doesn't matter. There are 30 teams, 32 teams, depending on the league. You get a pink jersey.
Right. And
she's so pissed. She's like, no, I'm a sports fan. I don't want to have a pink jersey. Like, whether or not I like pink is a separate matter. This is ridiculous. So I think it's interesting that she has like this visceral reaction to it. She hates it.
Right.
So
yeah, that's understandable. I mean, I totally understand that.
So it makes sense why she identifies with Nancy Drew. she likes the female heroine. Okay, so we just wanted to cover our thoughts on the reaction to the video. So go ahead and lay out for us your response to the community's reaction.
Okay, so I think there's a lot of mixed bag results and comments. I think there's a group that agrees with her. I think there's a group that doesn't disagree with her, but is just an absolute troll and wants to say horrible things. And, and then there's a group that, strongly disagrees with her, which you'll see there's plenty of response videos that people post of just going kind of argument to argument, bit by bit. My issue, I didn't realize how strongly I had a reaction to this video and this whole kind of, this whole discussion until I saw this piece on RPS, Rock Paper Shotgun. And the fellow who writes it, I'm blanking on his name. I'm not good with names today. John Walker.
Right. Yeah.
So John Walker wrote it.
It's a forgettable name.
He basically, in a nutshell, kind of says what we both kind of said, but what you said more strongly is that I always kind of notice the silliness with bows, like kind of just put a bow on it. Now it's a girl kind of situation, but now that I've seen it all in succession, one after the next example, it's not as funny anymore, and it's indicative of a wider issue, right? So. I mean, I don't think the problem that angers me is that I don't think this passes as an intellectual piece. Like, it just seems really intellectually lazy. I think there's a lot of there's no, courage to just really think it through, and you might actually end up disagreeing with some points. I don't think he wanted to disagree with anything she had to say.
Yeah, he doesn't meet her on the same plane as kind of the seriousness with which she's taking this, and this isn't some diatribe against like a patriarchal society, but she's taking this issue seriously and is presenting it in a very straightforward manner. Even if he agrees with her, he could at least rise to that level and say, here's where I specifically agreed or disagreed.
Right.
But it's a very short article, and it does just seem like a way to, let's make a reaction to this. We know this particular page will get a bunch of hits because it's associated with this video.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, let's disable comments.
So here's the crux of my argument, right? I want to get to it. This is where I'm going to make an analogy. As the gaming community, if anyone in public light gets up in front of the gaming community and says that violence, if you get anywhere suggesting that violence can affect reality in video games, that if you have violent video games, it's going to make our society more violent, people in the gaming community go absolutely crazy. And if you get anywhere close to agreeing with that statement, you're a pariah in the gaming community. You're not allowed to say that. You know what I mean? People have their very strong feelings with good reason, because there's no really statistical information or proof. In fact, the opposite, that video games do anything when it comes to violence in real life, as violent as video games are. So here's where I feel like there's a logical disconnect. She says in the video, and this is where I most vehemently disagree with her, she says, and I'm quoting her, I think, both the Miss Male character and the Smurfette principle have been normalized in gaming and in mass media more broadly, so much so that the two tropes usually pass under the radar and are often reproduced unconsciously, which is part of what makes the myths these perpetuate about women so powerful and insidious in our culture. That line, had I reformed that sentence to talk about violence instead of, like subjugating women, people would go crazy, disagree, and say, you're an idiot. You don't know that, games do nothing when it comes to violent behavior in real life. I don't know how you could then turn and say, well, this is happening in video games and this affects real life. I don't know how you get it both ways per se, but that's the opinion of violence in video games versus violence in real life is that they do not affect each other. The worlds do not come together at any point. So she's saying this subjugation of women in video games reproduces itself as subjugation in real life. How do you then connect the two worlds? That's my issue. That's my question to the gaming community. Anyone who says that she's right, that she has a point, but also believes that violence in video games does absolutely nothing to the real world. How do you reconcile those two options?
So you don't, just clarification's sake, you don't think that it's logically consistent to believe or to suggest that it's possible that violent video games do not produce violent effects in societal behavior, while at the same time believing that gender stereotypes in games do affect societal behavior.
That's, in a nutshell, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay. So you're not trying to suggest the kind of validity of one or the other. You're just saying, as a community, how can we say that these elements of games and the way games are designed, that the messaging gets through on some dynamics and not others?
Yeah, exactly.
I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's. I mean, I think you might have said it better than I've said. So
What I get used to that.
it's a good summary of what I was saying.
So what I think, and when you first said to me that you wanted to discuss this, this is before I had read this article or seen this video. What I knew I wanted to touch upon, and it turned out to be kind of validated by seeing this, and that's not confirmation bias. That just means I was right beforehand. I think that whether you believe that whatever themes you get from video games, whether or not you believe they translate into society, I think what we can likely agree on is that expressions of these themes in media are it's much more likely, and this is not novel, I'm not breaking ground here. A lot of people think this way. It's much more that the things we insert consciously or subconsciously into creative media are manifestations of widely held societal beliefs. So the counter argument most often given in the violence in video games debate is video games don't make you violent. A violent society produces violent video games. And it would not sell if we didn't like violence. You could try to extend that to say, however, if there are games that are kind of blatantly kind of advocating the subjugation of women or showing them in such a way that's not kind of respectful or equal, is that to say that there's something about our society that craves that? Or I think this is a little more subtle, because violence is not as subtle. There can be subtle violence in games. There can be subtle aggression in games. But I think this point, the analogy I think is apt. However, I do think that in our society, violence is much more overt, whereas gender stratification is much more, it also can be overt, but it's also very subtle. And so I think she touches upon the fact that subtlety can play a role here, and that while video games may not play a huge role in reinforcing these established norms, they are part of the larger contributory larger contributory phenomenon. Because it's not insidious, as you said. Did any of what I just said make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I understand, and I think, I mean, I agree with you that, opinions about other genders or how you look at other genders or portray them is more subtle than violence, right?
Right.
But violence, has a moral aspect to it. I don't think the morality of people are breaking down due to violent video games, where someone might not go out and kill someone because they just played GTA, but do they think, killing X person or being violent against some type of person is not as egregious before they played the video game? Do you know what I mean? That their opinions are changing due to the video game. So it's just my argument is mostly this is, does she claims it's more cyclical, okay? That, we have these opinions, they mirror in the video games, and the video games perpetuate the opinions, right? But gamers have always kept because violence was always the big thing in video games. What about video game violence was always the big issue. And we said there's nothing cyclical about it. It's just a mirror. We're a violent culture as humans, right? So there's violence in video games, plain and simple. But there's no cyclical nature to it. This is the thing. Like, if you're gonna really think deeply on this issue with what the issue that she brings up, which is a good issue because it forces us to ask these questions. When does that cyclical nature stop, and when is it just a mirror, and why do you get to differentiate between the two? And that's my piece.
This is what it is.
This is what it is.
This is what it is. Well, I think there's a lot to chew on here, and I hope we've done it in a way that makes sense. This is not there's no finality to our thoughts here. We're just asking more questions, and I'd be really interested to see what our viewers would say. I know that a 500 character limit isn't always the best way to kind of respond and have this debate, which is why for stuff like this, we highly encourage you, if you have a more long form way that you want to respond to either what we've said or just her video, we encourage you to just shoot us an email or send us a message. I do think, though, that, and it may be obviously a subject for a separate discussion, But I do wonder if as more, I think we've seen statistics now. We had one in a video long ago about the fact that I think more than 50% of women are gamers now. If you can, or more than 50% of 50% women, 50% of gamers are women. That's what
Right.
happens when you mix up words in a sentence. Anyway, I think that as you are seeing the dynamic shift, you're going to see a lot of this change. And
Right.
there's a discussion that I want to do eventually on a article on Polygon.com called "No Girls Allowed." It kind of is challenging the myth that video games are just made for boys. And I think there's a lot of legs to all peripheral arguments stemming from this same issue. And so there's a lot to discuss here. So we certainly welcome any and all input, as long as you're not trolling. But I really don't think that our community, like our PC elitist community, is that kind of people.
No, I don't think so.
No, they're good folk.
That's right.
But I do think that she is raising a lot of good points, but largely, I mean, she mentioned some games that are more recent, like 2011, 2012, but they're games that, frankly, I've never heard of. And not that that means anything. The fact that I haven't heard of them doesn't mean they're not popular or influential. But she mentions a lot of games from the past where the predominant gender argument you could have is how women are being portrayed. To me, the argument to have is why is every single female character nowadays highly sexualized, where they have, and this is kind of the Barbie phenomenon, but they have ridiculously small waists, enormous breasts, and they're wearing armor that is accentuating all of those features. And it's like, why is every single female video game character really attractive, whereas most male female characters are kind of ugly and big and bulky? I don't know. So
That's a whole different bag of discussion.
I know,
though,
but I just think that women in gaming and how they're represented, there are many different ways you can attack it.
right.
So I think
Obviously, by the time they get around armoring the big, bulky, ugly guy, they just don't have enough. They just have enough for a bikini, and they give that to the chick. Okay?
I guess.
Okay. I am Woodsie.
I am Shepherd. This is the PC Elitist signing out.